Oh, I don't know, man. My brain hurts.
I was just going to say I'm going to resurrect an old motif.
Okay, let's hear it.
An old running gag, and I'm going to eat while we do this.
Hell yeah. What you eating? What you got?
I'll give you 3 guesses.
I'm going to guess a pork of some kind.
No pork. No pork this time.
Is it a beef?
There is beef in it.
Oh, you're going the Raban route. You just hacked some off of a hanging cow. Did the old Harkonnen way.
No, it is.
A little beef swelling for Dune enthusiasts.
It is spaghetti and meatballs, which
okay.
I think I've had on the show before.
Okay. You have, yeah. We talked some hefty pasta.
Yes.
Throwing it back with a classic. I like it. So, we are going to be talking Frank Herbert's Dune, the original 65 novel that launched it all the weirdness and all the insanity that is Dune. Deep lore. Like, honestly, possibly comparable. I don't want to say better or worse, but like in a similar arena to Tolkien's Lord of the Rings.
Yeah,
mythology.
I mean, I've always thought of it, and I think he gave an interview one time I watched online. He kind of simplifies it in the sense of, and this could just be like a marketing technique back when he was getting interviewed.
Yeah.
He kind of simplifies it a little bit as like kind of King Arthur in space a little bit.
Yes.
Like if you were gonna,
at least that first book, that's a fair assessment.
Yeah, like if you're gonna try and like pitch it to someone who's never heard of it or seen it or isn't necessarily, okay, what am I getting into? That's kind of a good tagline or log line. That's kind of part of your elevator pitch, which was drilled into our heads back in the day. It's like, all right, what is it? Well, it's Die Hard on a bus.
As far as its influence too, I think you can kind of see its fingerprints all over science fiction following that point. I mean, if you want to get, I don't want to get too deep down the spiral of the adaptations, the film adaptations, but especially Jodorowsky's not completed take, that one you can say impacted pretty much all of modern science fiction, even though it was never even completed, which is crazy. But yeah, like I said, we're not going down that spiral because that's a whole topic in and of itself.
Well, we're here to talk about the original book.
Frankie Herbs and his beautiful beard. Yeah, Frank Herbert, 1965. He was actually working on a separate writing project when he came about this. He went out to the Oregon desert and was doing drugs and got hardcore inspired to write this.
So he was doing drugs.
Yes, he was a very avid partaker of the mushrooms and all the delightful psychedelics. He
like
was,
psilocybin or something.
Oh yeah, he was into all of it big time. And as you can see from the topic of the spice melange.
That explains a lot,
apparent.
I would say.
Yeah, because basically all of Dune is about space drugs. It pretty much governs every aspect of Dune and all the elements of it. The Landsrat, the Bene Gesserit, all of it pretty much runs purely on drugs.
A very, very powerful drug.
Yes. So spice melange, only found on the planet Arrakis, which, now there's a lot to get into all of this. I don't think we're going to get through everything, but I'll cover what I can.
Yeah.
And the spice can basically, in its most important form, it can be refined to help the Spacing Guild navigate the cosmos. So basically it is a drug that affects the mind, but is basically equatable to oil in that it helps the Spacing Guild who actually pilot the ships. They gives them the mental prowess to be able to transport the ships.
Yeah. And I always took it, and tell me what you think. The metaphor behind it, I mean, if you look at it, the representation of it, I always took it as like a MacGuffin for power, essentially.
Oh yes,
and
it is actually. I think there is quotes from Herbert stating that it was meant to be an allegory for Middle Eastern oil.
Okay, yeah, and it's because everyone uses it in I think like different ways, right? Like obviously the travelers use it for that's actual space travel, but it can also enhance your lifespan, I believe. No,
yeah, it prolongs the lifespan. The Bene Gesserit use a different refinement of it in order to see into the future because their whole thing is mapping out the past and the future genetic lines and manipulating those genetic lines to try and orient the outcome of various timelines to a direction that they would prefer. They're kind of the shadow government pulling the puppet strings behind everything.
I believe the Bene Gesserit are strictly women now.
Yes, they are commonly referred to as the Sisterhood of the Bene Gesserit. Derogatory term used against them is they are called witches, even though they don't really like that. They don't like their business being flared in the public, and anything that shows them as that, which is basically what they are. And another thing too, I mean, this I think it's worth taking note that the year of these events of this first novel, at least at the start of the book, is the year 10,191, supposing to be the same timeline, like the future of the current Earth human timeline.
So about
as we've expanded
8,000 years in the future right now. Yeah.
So I mean, like, there's a lot of layers, a lot of lore, a lot of history to those missing 8,000 some years between now and then. And I think that there's a lot of one of the reasons that Dune is gaining a lot of popularity in current time is that there is a big rise in AI, and one of the big things in the lore and history of Dune is we've actually talked on the show before about the Butlerian Jihad, which is basically the plot of Terminator happens, AI takes over, does its absolute best to crush humanity, but we fight back and kick its ass.
Yeah, I always thought that was an interesting concept to Dune. Is the technology is big, obviously, but the tech, if you will, in science fiction, anytime you're writing like a fantasy or science fiction story, the magic or the tech in the sci-fi world is like an integral part. So in Dune, Herbert kind of downplays the tech
and kind of strips that element out of it to a large degree.
Yeah.
Which is almost why I kind of consider Dune to be on that line. We've talked about certain things being on that line of science fiction and fantasy before. I think this one just sits just left of that fence into science fiction, though it is about as close as it could be.
You can go either way with it. I wouldn't, like, if I went into a bookstore and someone had it in science fiction, I'd be like, cool. And if someone else had it in fantasy, I'd be like, yeah. If someone had it in teen romance, I'd be like, what are you doing? But I could also see that as well.
You just tell them that they're on drugs. The lore of this franchise, it really does kind of suck you in. It's impossible to grasp all of it. Like any one of these books, and then each one expands this world to a crazy degree and takes you to weird places, because the first one is very much the hero's journey, though you're meant... Herbert was quoted as saying he felt a lot of people didn't get what he intended out of that first book, and that was to create a hero's journey story that kind of crushed the idea of hero's journey stories. You're kind of supposed to hate Paul.
Well, yeah, and again, I can remember another interview he gave, not that I was there in person, just online here, but he said, I feel, I'm paraphrasing this, but it was along the lines of, I feel that heroes should come with their own warnings. A Surgeon General warning is like when on a bottle of wine or something, oh, hey, use of this could cause blah, 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 or like the side effects of when you have we have to take a medication, side effects could include, and he described that the same thing. He said, I think heroes, leaders should come with that as well, because the decisions that a leader makes, the consequences like propagate throughout whoever's following them. And I think that's why one of the famous scenes in the book is, as Paul says, not to get too far ahead.
Yeah, no.
But when he gives his speech, and what is it, like hail to the fighters or something along those lines, that's like a big thing, and everyone just kind of like is like, yeah, all about it now. So that's one big thing. Yes, I think can get lost sometimes in what the story, like you said.
One of the things that I love about it, we've talked time travel stories to a degree, and I think how this story utilizes its version of time travel, which is Paul looking into the future. Knowledge of the future is as important as going or traveling there, and he has a basically constant understanding of the future after a certain point in this story. And as he's looking into the future and knowing what's around every corner, he's actively trying to change and better what's happening, and he can't, or at least he can't, as far as like the story is, he's trying to avoid certain terrible atrocities, and he can't, because they just keep unfolding the way that he has seen them, no matter how hard he tries to push against them.
That brings up a kind of little side tangent here. You talk about like time travel. I was watching on, not sponsored. Have you ever seen the YouTube channel Kurzgesagt? I don't know if I'm saying that right exactly.
I don't believe that I have.
I think it's a German word, and it kind of means just like in a nutshell or something like that. They do a lot of fun animated videos and ask like really deep questions, a lot of science related questions or questions about humanity or stuff like that. I highly recommend the YouTube channel if you ever want to look at something fun. And they're not usually super long videos. Some are, but the majority are pretty, like, I'd say 15, 20 minutes long. But they did one about this theory about how time, like a frozen block theory of time, and that if you look at one moment in time, let's say like one moment in time is a sheet of paper and everything happening on that sheet of paper, a drawing, right? But then if you take a stack of them, let's say our universe, the beginning is the page one and then the end is whatever final page that is. It essentially is saying that time itself is frozen in this block and everything you do has already been predetermined.
Yeah.
And they use that example of like pages in a book, essentially. It's already been designed and mapped out. And it gets a little trippy, but yeah, it's similar to what you're saying there, that Paul can't affect what he's trying to do.
If we'll go down a time travel tangent for a second, there are basically two theories of time travel that can be narrowed down. And that's causal determinism and the multiverse theory. Basically, if you're doing time travel, you're doing one of those two things. And one of the things I love about the series Dark is it actually kind of dips its toe in both of them.
Okay.
It actually finds a way to prove both theories as potentially correct, which I found interesting. This also kind of dabbles in a similar arena, whereas like Paul is seeing the future and trying to avoid. He finds that he can kind of lay drops in the barrel and make small changes to things that he saw. So he's kind of playing with that arena a little bit, but he's the only one in the entire universe capable of doing this. So he's kind of on his own and trying to figure it out.
It's from snorting too much of that spice.
The sweet melange. He's been huffing all that spice, getting all hopped up.
The melange. No. I will not pervert these words. Go ahead.
But yeah, one of my favorite quotes from the book is actually one of the laws of the Imperium created as a result of the Balerian Jihad is that thou shalt not make a machine in the likeness of the human mind.
Yeah, that is such a good quote too.
Yeah, it's one that hits you and stands with you, and especially, like I said, given the rise of AI that we're looking at now, I think it's only gaining relevance, and it's revered within this world that you should do things of your own accord, and basically any man that relies on a machine is a weak man, is the idea.
Yeah, and that is interesting, and I think it's not to say too, it's kind of, obviously they do still have machines, but again, this is where you kind of get this kind of like, this really helps with the world building. And like, how many times today where like, man, anyone's just looking to try and pick apart your story or your project and be like, well, they're trying to find that one thread that makes it fall apart and loses its continuity. I think this right here is kind of the seal mark that kind of protects it all. It's like, thou shalt not make a machine in the likeness of the human mind.
Yeah.
So cars,
like all of their processing power,
okay,
they rely on the mentats. Yeah. The mentats are basically human computers who take there's another refinement of SPICE that they take to enhance their calculation abilities. So basically they're walking computers. They call them assassins, but they're basically human computers. Mm-hmm. And they rely entirely on humankind and the prowess of where humankind can be pushed, even through the art of drugs, and in most cases through the art of drugs, but all the same. Like, it has to be done by the hand of a human, by the hand of a human being. And we even see through the Bene Gesserits, like they have, it's through every facet of this. They believe that the test that they give Paul is the test of the Bene Gesserit to prove whether or not they're human. If they're a human, mm-hmm. they can be allowed to exist within the order. But if they're proved as what they define as an animal, which is something subhuman, there is no reason to leave that animal, quote, air quote, alive.
Yeah. No, and that's a key scene, and that is the very first scene of the book.
I always thought it was interesting that it's in every adaptation it's pushed further into.
Yeah. It's usually not shown right away, which I guess I could understand. As having gone through school, I can sort of see why, because there is a lot of backstory to Dune.
Also, because it has a lot of intrigue throughout science fiction already. It's a very revered story already. So I think a lot of times it's pushed back to hold your interest a little bit longer because you know it's coming.
Although I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the original, like the first editions or so of Dune, I think it had like an encyclopedia entry in the very beginning, sort of explaining all the big names like the Bene Gesserit, the Spacing Guild, the Mentats, all that. I think, I don't remember now. I'm trying to, like, I used to have a very old copy of Dune.
I saw a copy or two that had that.
But yeah, I reread and I had a modern version of it, and I don't know if maybe they did change that, but in this newer version that was released, the very first scene is roughly Paul going to
at least the Reverend Mother Mohiam arriving on Caladan.
Yeah, the Gom Jabbar
the Gom
test.
The poison tipped needle.
Yeah. Which and I think it I don't know. I think it works great that's the first scene. I don't know. So that is an interesting little thing.
In storytelling, you talk about a hook. I mean, what better hook of putting your main character in the fate of death from the early pages?
And one thing too, though, that helps in this sense is Herbert wisely chooses to use third person omniscient in the style of how he writes.
Yes.
So that allows him to get more information out. You got to be careful with it though, because you can head hop. I know today that's not the fashionable way to write. People prefer either third person limited or first person when it comes to a book. Omniscient though can be done really well, but I would say it's arguably the most difficult to pull off.
And it's interesting because you see a lot more of Paul's perspective in the book, I think, than looking specifically at Lynch and Villeneuve's adaptations or the miniseries, but that perspective, which I think is lost in all three of those.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lot more understanding in the book. I think that there's a lot that needs to be left on the cutting room floor by leaving out that perspective, because once you go down that road, it's like, all right, you're going to need a ton more time to explain all this. So like, I think it's understandable that they're dropping it out. We've talked before about food and cooking in storytelling and how it's a comparable metaphor. I think that I was thought about this the other day, and I thought it was real funny that a little bit of spice makes everything nice.
Oh my God. How long did it take you to come up with that one?
I've been sitting on it. Yeah, it's basically, and besides it being a drug, it is space oil, but it is also the way that many of these organizations and many of the houses of the Landsrat, that's another term that I wanted to clarify, that puzzled me through the books, what the Landsrat actually is, because the way Herbert writes, he throws a lot of tangential terms around that all kind of mean different things, but are used interchangeably to describe the same things. There's often 6 terms that mean roughly the same thing, but have different segmented context in and of themselves. How Paul is often referred as the Muad'Dib, the Lisan al-Gaib, the Kwisatz Haderach. These are all terms from basically different societies that roughly mean the same thing, even though Muad'Dib is basically the desert mouse on Arrakis, and that's why the Fremen refer to him as that, because he is seen as the desert mouse that survived unlikely circumstance through the desert. But that's still they're still basically referring to him as the Messiah, the Lisan al-Gaib, which is the Fremen term given to them by the Bene Gesserit for what the Kwisatz Haderach is, which is, in the Bene Gesserit terminology, a mind that can bridge time and space.
Yeah.
So it's just when you're reading this, it's your brain is going in circles.
It's definitely. I do recommend reading it. I know for some it might just not be their thing. It might come off boring. It's a lot.
I wouldn't even call it a lot. It's just overwhelming. Yeah, I wouldn't call it boring. It's overwhelming. I look at it as it's almost a bit of a fever dream read. One of those I think it's meant to come over that way in the term of the drugs and the euphoria state of everything. I think you're meant to kind of have that feeling.
No, it's definitely one that if someone were to tell me, it just wasn't for me, understandable. If someone tells me, it sucks so bad, it's terrible, I'm like, I don't know about that.
Yeah. I can definitely see it not being people's cup of tea, because you and I have talked before about, especially in regards to the fantasy genre, about having this buffet of lore to dive into. That is my forte, because I love to research. I love to dive in. I love to get my hands dirty and try and figure out what all this crazy is. Yeah,
and why not?
But some people just want to sit back and watch something sometimes. So to each their own.
But you were saying the Landsrat, for example, is pretty much just as I've always understood it, just the great houses.
Yes. So there are multiple houses throughout the Imperium. Yeah. But there is this top 1% of houses that reach a certain status, that reach a certain wealth, respect, There's different ways to be classified within the Landsrat, but
Yeah. And I think too that I don't know if I've always kind of thought this. I don't know if this is true, but that I've always looked at Herbert kind of making a commentary on we can try as much as we want, but we'll always sort of refute back. I guess that's the word I have to use because I can't think of the other one. Refute back to some form of feudalism or tribalism in that way. If things will just get too big and we just have to revert back. So there's the word I was looking for. Revert back to.
Kind of what I like about it is it feels like kind of like that medieval feudalism, but like fused with like modern culture of these evil corporations, like puppet stringing everything. So it's like, it's kind of got all of that going on with futuristic space drug magic going on and people using their brains to shout each other into submission kind of stuff. And like all this weird kind of brain magic going on.
Mm-hmm.
I'm very into weird. So Dune is up my alley.
In case anyone was not aware, he's into weird.
Yeah, Dune is a weird book, but like when you look at it in comparison to God Emperor, especially like once we get down the road.
Well, yeah, I would say
too,
I wouldn't like tell. Well, it wouldn't make sense anyway. I don't think, but I wouldn't tell anyone to pick up God Emperor first. I'd be like, no,
like it is slightly off topic with the. With the adaptations, but like once they announced that they were doing Dune on a big scale, I was like, they are never doing God Emperor, at least not the way that it's written.
No, yeah.
It's way too weird for mainstream audiences.
It would, I mean, that would be something though. That would be very something.
I would love to see that happen, but I highly doubt it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I to get into it too, I mean, there's a lot to dive in. Paul, as you know, the Reverend Mother Mohaim states in that early scene, he inherits too much power, and there's a lot of layers to that statement because Paul, like from like 8 or 9 different avenues, is gaining power through the course of this book. There is a bullet point in the plot that I am specifically not going to bring up that happens in book 1 because it was not introduced in Villeneuve's part 1. And I have a feeling it's coming up in part 2. So I don't want to state it, but one of the last pieces of information you learn from book 1 is in regards to a secret that Jessica has that relates to Paul. And beyond that, I'm going to keep my mouth shut. But it is very important to the nature of this story and how it is progressing. And it comes at the exact midpoint of the first book. Mm-hmm. And Paul is at the early stages of the book is being trained as a mentat, which is interesting because it proves that he already is at a pulpit of great intelligence. Like he can already calculate circles around most people. So, and then on top of that, he is heir to one of the great houses of the Landsrat. Yeah,
the House Atreides.
And he's also being trained in the ways of the Bene Gesserit, which is so incredibly rare for a male.
I was with the Bene Gesserit once, a couple years back.
How was that weekend? They were throwing spice around. There were bowls everywhere. It was a crazy weekend.
It was a cold night in October, let me tell you.
I woke up on Caladan several weeks later without my pants.
And then realized I had sold my pants in a drunken state to someone else. Oh, God. Okay, keep going.
Yeah. So since we're on the topic of the Bene Gesserit, there are many elements to that. The Reverend Mother Mohaim from that initial scene, she is the quote-unquote truth-sayer to the Emperor himself. And what a truth-sayer is a Bene Gesserit reverend who has the mental power to be able to tell when someone is lying or not. And for her to be the truth-sayer of the Emperor himself is kind of a big deal. I mean, she's like a hot shot. She can smoke out a lie like no other. So she is one of the head puppet string pullers of the Bene Gesserit. She is guiding these genetic bloodlines towards the ideal future. She's trying to puppet string all this stuff, and she gets very pissed off with Paul's mother, Lady Jessica, because she finds out 15 years too late, but she does find out that she gave House Atreides a male heir, which was not part of their plans, their game book behind the scenes.
It was supposed to be, wasn't it? It was supposed to be, unless you don't want to get to that.
Well, it was supposed to be a daughter. She was supposed to birth a daughter to the house. Yeah. And that was a boo-boo. She was not supposed to, because the Bene Gesserit have complete and total control of whether they birth a male or a female offspring. which is kind of insane.
Yeah, and I think it was that birth a daughter who was then supposed to wed someone from Harkonnen, no? And then that was going to be
Yes, I think you're right. Yes.
Quetzalcoatl, right? Or something like that. Like she did it
Down
like
the
one
line
generation
further.
too early or something.
Yes,
or like
it was supposed to
one
be
or two
further down the
generations
line.
too early.
And the Bene Gesserit could not see this coming.
Yeah,
Which is also a big
I've always
important
taken as a little. Once again, I mean this book is filled with little commentaries or ways you can read it.
Yes.
I always
That's
took
why
that
it's
as
so like these film adaptations are so drastically different because you can like really pick this up a lot of different ways.
I always took that as like a little bit of how does fate and free will, just a little discussion on that. Them not being able to see Lady Jessica's decision
Yes.
to have Paul, I think I always took it as just a little commentary or just discussion or open discussion for you, the reader, to be, fate versus free will and all that, which shadows what Paul keeps trying to do.
And it's also the we'll get into the rise of the Kwisatz Haderach, and the whole thing with that is like you said.
What a name. Sounds like do you remember Quiznos? Do they still exist?
They do still exist. Those little furball commercials. The Kwisatz
Oh yeah,
Haderach.
that's that is exactly what I was going to say. Like, I don't know why, but like around the time that commercial came out was like the first time I sort of saw Lynch's Dune.
Yeah.
From the 80s, and they would always
Lynch's Dune
say,
is insane. It is.
Yeah.
It is like it literally is like 500 pounds of potatoes in a 2.5 pound sack. It is so crammed in there.
But just when they would say like Kwisatz, oh my God, I can't say it now. Say it for me.
The Benedict Cumberbatch.
Well, the Kwisatz Haderach. I'm saying it wrong, but when I was little, I'm like, why are they talking about Quiznos subs in this? Say Quiznos sub.
They're taking product placement to a whole other degree.
Yeah,
in the 80s.
but that's a little tangent. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
The Quiznos Haderach.
What a name! What a name though to come up with.
Quiznos Cat Scratch. Yeah, so they're the Bene Gesserit with this Kwisatz Haderach. They are trying to bring about a male Bene Gesserit at a key point that is a mind powerful enough to bridge space and time. The male Bene Gesserit would be able to look into not only male bloodlines, which the females of the Bene Gesserit cannot do. They can only look into the genetic memories of female members of the bloodline, and kind of they're piecing together what they can from that. So a male would be able to look throughout the entirety of their genetic line and know the full story. And they're working very hard to bring that about at a key point that will be of most benefit to them. And that's why they get so angry when someone's upsetting their plan, because you're talking like thousands of years of planning. And
just gone on a whim.
This Lady Jessica just goes off and has a boy.
Which, do they ever actually say how she does that? I honestly don't remember now.
If it is in the books, I don't recall off the top of my head.
How she makes sure that she has a boy.
I know it is fairly specific to the Bene Gesserits.
But yeah, that's true. I mean, yeah, you throw the spice in there, you got the
everything being nice.
that Old Spice.
The other two big things from the Bene Gesserit are the voice, which and the Villeneuve version is very well expressed and explained. It is
is essentially like, no, I was just going to say like this is before Star Wars.
Yes. So, largely argued that Dune was pulled from Force to create a lot of the background world of Star Wars.
Yeah. I'm just saying, like, if you were to tell someone what is the voice, I'm like, if I'm just trying to get someone interested in it, I would point to it's similar to the Jedi mind tricks. But
yes.
this predates that. All right.
Yeah. So the mental power of the Bene Gesserit, they've not, I wouldn't say evolved, but they've progressed the human capabilities of the mind to basically force persuasion to an entirely other stratosphere where they can basically persuade you into doing things you don't even understand that you're doing. Mm-hmm. It's described in the books as the voice basically slamming into your conscience and forcing you to do things.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting spiral of lore on that front. But there's also the weirding way. The Reverend Mother.
I love that term.
It is a very fascinating term.
Yeah, it just like, and that's one thing. I'm going to tangent off again. I'm sorry.
Tangent
I
off.
love his use of of like oxymoron in the book, like taking two terms and putting them together, and you get that clash, but it like creates something new. The common example is like a cold sweat. I broke out into a cold sweat. What does that mean? Usually if you're sweating, you're hot, but you're cold at the same time. So something like the weirding way, it's simple, very simple words here. We're not using something that you need to have a dictionary look up to see what's happening. Apart from all the terms he made up in this, when it comes to getting the reader hooked or describing something, he does keep it simple.
Yeah, and that's what I think is so interesting about it, is as complex as a book as it is, it does draw you in a very interesting way. And what the Weirding Way is specifically is a fighting style within the Bene Gesserit, meant for short distances, and it's very attack speed heavy. It is unique, and nobody really knows how to counter it, which makes it particularly useful in their hand-to-hand combat, because of the shield generators and everything is very common within this world.
Yeah.
Guns are rendered pretty useless. It's knife play and sword play in close quarters combat is really the name of the game in this world. Other things I wanted to dive down into following the Kwisatz Haderach.
Yes,
there is the spacing the Quiznos.
Sorry, I'm just that was always one. I remember the first time I read the book, I was like, "The does that say? Like, what is that?
What the hell is that?"
I thought there would have been a Q in there somewhere,
yeah.
But like Kuta. But anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, so there's the Spacing Guild, which we do see. It's not actually stated that we see them in the Villeneuve take, but it's interesting because they arrive with the Emperor's Herald of the Change to summon House Atreides to go take stewardship over planet Arrakis. They're the ones wearing all the head garb and everything. You can't see them because the use of Spice Melange, which they use to navigate the Holtzman drive engines that allow us to achieve intergalactic, interstellar travel.
Fold space, yeah.
Yeah, and basically because we're not using computers to do this, the mental power it takes to achieve that type of calculation can only be achieved through spice, which basically makes it oil. The Spacing Guild is very much involved in the politics of the world. They are very much involved with the Emperor. They are like, I wouldn't say under the Emperor's thumb, but they are like more so like they
or the Emperor is under their thumb,
theirs.
depending on how you look at it.
Yeah, it's a very complex dynamic, but they are very much pressuring the Emperor to kick Leto's butt, get him out of there. He's
they are
causing
I
problems.
guess the equivalent in our world would be in our time would be just very powerful lobbyists. I would imagine
very much so. Also the case with the CHOAM Corporation. CHOAM is basically Amazon times 1,000. They oversee all commerce and trade, and their big influence is they are responsible for water on Arrakis. And by that means, under Harkonnen rule over Arrakis, there is a lot of backdoor smuggling of the spice, getting the spice out, and everybody's getting their piece. That's part of the whole problem here, is because under Harkonnen rule, everybody wants to get their piece, and the Harkonnen House allows this to occur because they understand the way of things. They understand that if they allow everybody to do their little backdoor, they're going to be rich as hell.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's essentially they're the ones who, in the beginning of the story, have control of Arrakis or Dune.
Yes.
And
they're giving unspeakable atrocities to the Fremen.
I mean, it's simple, not supply and demand, but if you're the only, I mean, it's a monopoly on it. Like, that's the only place you can get it, and if you have control of it, man, it's just like, I can charge whatever I want. It's like in the second, oh my God, Woodstock, the second Woodstock in the 90s when all went to hell at that concert, and like people didn't have water anymore. So the people who had the water, like the vendors, were just, well, they can't leave. They can't get the water anywhere else. We're the only ones that got it. Jack up the price. Same thing.
Well, it's like any sports arena.
Oh yeah. That's a better example. Why? I don't know why I didn't come up with that one.
No, it's okay. Like, it's the same thing, really. You go there, you want to get a beer. It's like, all right, you would get a beer and a Manny sandwich. It'll cost you as much as like 15 of them outside.
Yeah, it'll cost you another ticket. Yeah,
it's nuts how that.
But that's
that
essentially
works.
what the Harkonnens are doing.
Yeah, and how it's since we're on the topic of the House Harkonnen, they were a house minor up until a certain point.
Yeah,
but it was when they were given we're talking further in the past. Like, they were given stewardship over Arrakis Arrakis, and then that like very quickly shot them up into a financial bracket that they were, and they manipulated things in the right kinds of ways, and they gained enough power to be considered. And they got real buddied with the Emperor because the Emperor was able to get his backdoor dealings out of there. He was getting his piece, the Harkonnens were getting their piece, all was happy with the world. But then this history starts to brew with Atreides' house, and tensions start to brew back and forth, and then before that, House Atreides wins a certain victory over House Harkonnen.
Yeah.
And the Emperor grants, as he calls it, a reward. It is actually a death sentence to House Atreides. He gives them stewardship over Arrakis. They are to move from Caladan, planet Caladan, to Arrakis and take control. And this is basically setting them up to be slaughtered.
Yeah. Oh, no, it's definitely a double cross. Because
and
to that,
everybody knows it. Leto knows it. Leto, who is a goody two shoes, if you were to put him on the old D&D bracket, he would be the lawful
which,
dude,
yes,
for sure.
the old, give him the old square, the old tic-tac-toe. That's a tool I always love to use.
It is really. Once we touch on D&D, I do want to cover that in depth as a writing tool. It's a good one. Nobody. It's proof positive that nobody likes a goody two shoes. It's bad for everybody's BS, all the backdoor dealings and everything. They don't like that. So he's got to go. They want him out. Yeah,
and to the Emperor, I know Atreides is a pretty popular house among the Landsrat, I believe.
Amongst the people, yes. He's being seen as someone who will bring peace and order back to the Imperium, someone who will kind of balance out all the BS.
And
but they
the
don't
Emperor,
want that.
Of course, feels threatened by that as well. So
all the corrupt politicians, of course, see this as a huge problem.
Yeah, no, that's exactly, and that's exactly how you look at our history. It's exactly similar to Caesar. Like the regular people loved him, but the senators,
the rest is history.
They were like, not that I'm advocating for tyranny or dictatorships.
Absolutely
but
not.
It's a similar quality, like it happens. It happens a lot.
Yeah, and this is like. I know a lot of people complain about the politics aspect of Star Wars, but I mean, this does it to a degree where it is
the
infused
politics
into
are
every
heavy,
element.
Yeah,
like
politics
it is like
are a much more
every
heavy concept in this.
Yeah, like at the centerfold of it is basically this spice space oil that it equates to not only the ability to travel but also wealth. There's a lot of layers to every element of this that are entwined with almost every other element of this story, and I think that's partly what makes it so good. Is everything is impacted by everything. They're all kind of in each other's pockets. They're all kind of dealing in the same things.
I mean, this is certainly a intricate web of alliances, promises, backdoor deals, everything like that. Yeah. The story is not as simplified as Star Wars is. If we're making that comparison. I don't mean that as a knock on Star Wars, but Star Wars is easier to follow in terms of what side you're on, what side you're not.
Star Wars is a much more straightforward hero's journey story, which is like you said, it is easy to follow, and I think that's partly what's made it so successful. Yeah, this is a whole other animal. There's multiple layers of complexity to every little thing. While on a surface it seems like it may be a fairly simple story. Like there's only 4 planets, whereas Star Wars there's like 30 planets. It
definitely uses the same simple structure of the narrative, but there's a lot to dig out and discuss.
Yeah,
there
for anybody going into Dune a first time, I would give the warning that it is a darker story than people would think that it is. Yeah, I know some people who got into that first Villeneuve take and are like, "Oh, this is going to be such a great hero's journey story." Kind of like was the attitude, in not such simple terms. But I was like, hold on, it's not going to be that uplifting. Especially like we talked about Dune Messiah. Once you get to that point, it felt like Herbert had to prove to people. He's like, no, you're not supposed to like these people. You're missing the point. And then he just like hits those themes on the head with a sledgehammer in Messiah. So just as a fair warning to anybody who gets into it, it's like this is a damning indictment of the human sentiment in a lot of ways. Is what this is.
Oh no, yeah, and going back to what I said before, he said I think heroes should carry that warning label with them. May be bad for your health. Yeah, which is such an interesting concept to think of, because but it is. I mean, he's not. I can't argue that he doesn't have a little bit of a point there. I mean, a
lot of a point.
I mean, think of all like people that we think of as heroes. Like, I mean, even just today's world, even if they really haven't done anything heroic, I mean, the Chiefs just won the Super Bowl again, and we would surely consider them all heroes. But this book would be like, why?
Yeah.
What they do? But they can affect you in a way that you don't realize. And because of their status and their power, that's essentially, I'm going around in circles here. Too much spice, but
you had way too much spice on your pasta.
yes, but way too much of that sriracha.
Sriracha. House Carino is Emperor Shaddam Carino.
Mm-hmm.
He is the emperor of the Imperium. He rules over the entire Landsrat.
Yeah.
And he has no sons, which is a big problem for him.
Yeah.
He has nobody to inherit his throne, and Paul knows this. It is the one chink in an otherwise unflawed armor.
Yeah. Flawless victory.
And flawless victory. So House Carino they're masters of puppeteering the politics of this world. Obviously, they wouldn't hold that seat of power if they weren't. His daughter, Irulan, becomes very important down the pipeline in a very interesting way during the Lynch adaptation.
Yeah.
A lot of people laugh about the introduction of her, how she comes back. Like, she fades out into space.
I know.
And then comes back. Oh wait, I forgot.
Such a good. Oh wait, there's one thing. It's like what?
It gets so. It's like it's trippy, like in a weird way, in a laughable way. I would say. Even Lynch doesn't like his take on Dune, which I think is the funniest part of the whole thing. Oh, I will say, if we're on the subject of Lynch's Dune, my favorite part of that entire movie is when the Baron is just flying around laughing. Every time I hear it, not in the actor's voice, but I've shared with you a couple times. I listened to Henry Zabrowski's podcast on LPN, and also he did a deep dive on Dune. And I hear every time I even watch that movie anymore, I hear it in his voice because he does it to such a funny degree in their show. Oh God, it's so funny.
Well, too, in that one, I remember I think they call it House Harkonnen. In that,
yeah, that was the other. There's debate over the pronunciation.
Yeah, I mean, I don't care either way. I know who they're talking about.
Yeah, I don't know. I've always it's kind of both. It's one of those things. Like, I feel like within the world of Dune, it's pronounced both ways, so it's like interchangeable. Yeah, and those are basically the three biggest houses of the Landsrat in terms of this story, in terms of how this particular book unfolds. There are a lot more things that get into down the road into the other books, but yeah, House Carino, House Harkonnen, House Atreides are like the principal ones in terms of this particular struggle over Arrakis.
Definitely, like I said, it has that simple structure in the sense of, like, if I was pitching it earlier, I said it's King Arthur in space a little bit, but much like King Arthur, there's a lot going on there beyond just the plot itself. Yeah.
And if Duke Leto is the goody two-shoes lawful good, then I would say Paul is the lawful neutral.
Yes.
He kind of doesn't have the goody two-shoes aspect, but he's still trying to do good.
Yeah.
But his actions lead it's the between Dune and Dune Messiah, I would say the point of the story is wariness of, try to say this right. Being wary of, I wrote it down somewhere. I don't know where I wrote it down.
God damn it.
And I think I just kind of forgot it, what I was trying to say.
The point of it is wariness.
No, it was, what was it? Why am I spacing on that?
Join the Spacing Guild? No. Shut your face.
It's gone. It's going to have to be in part 2. Paul's ability to look into the future is known as prescience within the novels.
Yeah.
And he is looking down the lines of all these possible futures, and he knows throughout the course of the story what's going to happen. He's trying to avoid these terrible outcomes, which is the jihad that is coming, that he know this war spreading in his father's name and his name, waving the Atreides banner at the foot of his father's grave and all this. He fears the death that surrounds him and things that he doesn't want to cause. He doesn't want all this mass war in his name, but he can't seem to avoid it. Everything he tries to do to avoid it leads him only further down that spiral.
Yeah.
I do love fate as it encompasses time travel. I've always been fascinated by that, and that's why I think causal determinism is my favorite form of that. There's a sense of tragedy in that I like. If meddling with the powers behind the curtain of time travel, something I feel mankind was not meant to meddle with, there is a price to be paid for dabbling in that.
Yeah.
And there's in the fatalistic take of causal determinism, I really like that. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that is prescience. I think it's an interesting topic that's touched on in the first book of Dune, like the first novel especially. I mean, it encompasses like a lot of the other layers, but it is like the principal guiding force.
Yeah,
in that first book.
Yeah, that like you said, that causal determinism.
Yeah, and the fate therein, and like with the Bene Gesserit trying to pull their puppet strings, they have a small sense of that. Whereas Paul is looking at like he's reading the whole book, whereas the Bene Gesserit are like picking out pages and trying to piece together the entire story. Mm-hmm. So it's complicated, and Paul doesn't even know how to wrestle with all this information that he has. He has basically the entire fate of the galaxy in his head. Whereas, like, there's an entire organization of space witches trying to figure all this shit out, and I can't even compete with this 15-year-old kid.
Yeah, no, there's definitely more to talk about.
Yeah, we'll go into a part 2. We'll get a little deeper this next week here.
If you're looking for something out there in terms of reading, I would say give Dune, give it a try.
I would say get past like those first 200 pages and then judge if you want to quit.
Yeah, so it's like I would say get past like the first 5 books, and then you're good.
if you get past the first 6 books of this 6-book franchise and you still want to keep no. Yeah, it is a lot, and I think that those early pages are tough. If you can get past that and still find that you enjoy it, then I'd say stick with it and give it a shot.
Yeah, same.
But yeah, we'll go deeper next week. I've pushed a lot of the spoilery topics for Dune Villeneuve's Dune Part 2 because I don't want people to watch and get discouraged for that next movie. So I'll keep what few of those I'm keeping, and I'm going to push to next week, and we'll give everybody a chance to hold that off and get to experience Villeneuve's take with fresh eyes. I've been very impressed with Villeneuve. I think he's doing a pretty interesting job with his take. So I think we're in store for a treat with that. I'm excited for it. But yeah, I encourage everybody to take a look at the book if you get a shot. It's got a lot deeper lore and material in it. And for anybody that likes to get into that kind of thing, I very much recommend it. It's gone. It's going to have to be in part 2.
Okay. Oh my God. Ended. You just end the episode with that. It's gone. It's going to have to be in part 2.